Welcome back to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into one of the most fascinating paradoxes in British television, the career of Martin Clunes. If you were watching TV in the 1990s, you know him as the absolute pinnacle of lad culture, the loud, immature, beer-guzzling slacker. But jump forward a couple of decades, and that exact same actor is the face of a somber, intensely serious murder detective in a true crime drama. How on earth does an actor manage to be completely believable as both a comedic punchline and a grieving nation's anchor for justice? Well, it's a total masterclass in acting versatility, and today we're going to break down exactly how he pulls it off. Right off the bat, you've got to look at the jarring contrast between his breakout comedic role and his acclaimed dramatic work. On one hand, you have Gary Strang from Men Behaving Badly, emotionally stunted, chaotic, and completely driven by his base impulses. Then, on the other hand, you have DCI Colin Sutton from Manhunt. He is sober, responsible, and an utterly ordinary man burdened with an extraordinary real-world task. As we'll see, Clunes uses two entirely different acting toolkits to bring these men to life. Act 1. The Comedic Lad. To really appreciate his range, let's throw it back to his 1990s comedic peak. Men Behaving Badly didn't just happen in a vacuum. It captured a very specific, totally wild cultural moment. In the early 90s, the sensitive, caring new man was suddenly being replaced in the cultural zeitgeist by the lad. This was the era of Loaded Magazine and Oasis. Clunes, alongside his co-star Neil Morrissey, played flatmates who were perfectly attuned to this shift, spending their time downing pints, acting entirely immaturely, and obsessing over the woman upstairs. You know, the crazy thing is that comedic chemistry hasn't faded one bit. In a recent television reunion where the two meandered around France for a travel series, they visited Arles, the town where Van Gogh famously cut off his ear. They were given a lesson in painting techniques and, naturally, decided to paint each other's portraits. Clunes, ever the comedian, painted Morrissey to look completely, hilariously murderous. It's just a perfect reminder of that natural, bantering comedic timing that made them so famous to begin with. But looking back at that sitcom through a modern lens, we kind of have to ask ourselves, were they really behaving that badly? I mean, it's easy to lump their characters in with toxic elements of 90s lad culture. But when you look closely at Clunes' acting choices, a totally different picture emerges. The secret behind his comedic style is actually pretty fascinating. Clunes and Morrissey recently pushed back on the idea that their characters were misogynistic. Instead, they explained that Gary and Tony absolutely adored women, but they were just in awe and mystified by them. Clunes himself noted that they were total failures, and therein lies the comedy. So he wasn't playing a toxic alpha male at all. He was playing a self-deprecating, hopeless failure. He used big reactions, physical comedy, and visible confusion to make the audience laugh at him, not with him. Act 2. The Sober Detective. Now, we really have to shift gears here because the subject matter Clunes tackled next is incredibly serious. An actor who relies solely on playing the fool can rarely carry a prestige drama. But in the ITV series Manhunt, Clunes completely stripped away his comedic persona to play DCI Colin Sutton. And this wasn't some fictional whodunit. This was the very real-world investigation into the horrific murders of young women, including Millie Dowler, Amélie Delagrange, and Marcia MacDonald by Levi Belfield. Clunes had to transform into an utterly ordinary detective suddenly burdened with finding justice for these devastating tragedies. There was a review from The Guardian that absolutely hit the nail on the head. They noted that his natural fleetness and lightness of touch remain, but they are pressed into the service of credibility rather than comedy. Think about that for a second. To play a real-life investigator handling profound grief, Clunes replaced his loud, frantic comedic timing with a quiet, grounded restraint. He played a man keeping himself and his team sane under literally suffocating pressure. And the drama itself totally mirrored this restrained acting style by focusing on the realistic, methodical grind of actual police work. The narrative moved outwards in concentric circles. It started from the white tent of the crime scene, expanded to the painstaking search through CCTV footprints, and finally built this overlapping Venn diagram of cold cases to catch the killer. Clunes anchored all this procedural heavy lifting by being a believable, diligent professional, which is a stark contrast to the sheer ineptitude of his sitcom days. Act 3. A master of versatility. Making an incredible pivot like that requires sheer range to conquer both of these vastly different television genres. We're looking at two distinct peaks of his career here. On one hand, his loud, chaotic energy won him the British Academy Television Award for Best Comedy Performance in 1996. On the other hand, decades later, He received intense critical acclaim for a dramatic performance that required him to literally anchor a grieving nation's justice on screen, while remaining entirely respectful to the real-life families involved. Which really begs the question, doesn't it? How does a performer bridge such a massive gap without losing the audience's trust? How do we watch the guy with underwear on his head one minute and implicitly trust him to catch a serial killer the next? Well, the answer seems to lie not just in his acting technique, but in who he actually is when the cameras stop rolling. Act 4. The Real Rural Man. Because the Martin Clunes who exists outside of the television industry is remarkably grounded. He lives with his wife, producer Philippa Braithwaite, on a 130-acre farm in Dorset. The funny thing is, they originally just wanted a field for their daughter's pony and somehow ended up with a massive estate. They own 12 horses, including massive working Clydesdales, along with cattle, sheep, and dogs. Plus, since 2011, he has literally been the president of the British Horse Society. He is definitely not your typical Hollywood socialite. He's a dedicated country farmer. His connection to the equestrian world is so profound. In an interview about his Clydesdales, he explained his passion by saying that the honesty, stoicism, size, and reliability of heavy horses just gets to him. He actually described it as a punch in the gut. He even works with a charity that uses specially trained horses to help reform the behavior of violent and disruptive young offenders. So he really deeply understands the calming, grounding power of the natural world. And because he's so fiercely protective of his rural community, his off-screen life involves some pretty deep civic engagement, along with some staunch local disputes. On one side, he and his wife organize the massive Buckham Fair, which is a beloved local event featuring dog and heavy horse shows. But on the other side, he recently engaged in a fierce 4-year legal planning battle to stop a permanent traveler site from being approved next to his home, a battle he ultimately lost when the council voted to allow the residents to stay. Whether you agree with his local planning stances or not, it undeniably shows a man stubbornly entrenched in his local reality, rather than the fleeting, superficial world of showbiz. But a really crucial takeaway here is his massive philanthropic impact on that local community. Through the Buckham Fair alone, he's helped raise a staggering £600,000 for local charities. Recently, the profits from the fair's highly anticipated return were dedicated entirely to the Dorset County Hospital's new emergency and critical care appeal. That is a game changer for his local area. When you lay it all out, you get this clear, amazing timeline of his evolution. In 1996, he's at the absolute height of lad culture with a comedy BAFTA. By 2011, his rural pivot is complete, as he's named president of the British Horse Society. In 2019, he stuns critics with his restrained, sober acting in Manhunt. And in 2026, he's back organizing the Buckham Fair, firmly rooted in his Dorset soil. And that brings us to the core takeaway of today's explainer. True acting versatility isn't just about putting on different masks. Clunes is able to portray the frantic ineptitude of a sitcom slacker and the heavy, quiet burden of a true crime detective precisely because his own identity is so incredibly secure. His ability to inhabit wildly different television worlds stems from the fact that he remains incredibly grounded in his own quiet rural reality off-screen. So, I want to leave you with this final thought to ponder. We've seen the loud comedian, the quiet, methodical investigator, and the stoic, horse-loving farmer. Which version of Martin Clunes do you think is his greatest role yet? Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and I will catch you in the next one.